All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 341 of the Health Detective Podcast. And we're moving right along again. If you guys have been following us for the last month, we've been a little slower on the output side with the podcasts, at least live. And hopefully that's because you already know the reason. We were hosting our summer open house, so we just did 44 live events in the month of June. I had the privilege of hosting like 42 of them. So as you can imagine, it's kind of hard to mix. And that's why I'm so glad when we have these weeks where we get to buff out 4 or 5 live podcasts, because you guys can always catch our audio side. If for whatever reason you don't want to participate in that stuff, we always have backlogs on the audio set to go. So those normal releases were still happening. I'm excited for this topic today, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But first, I want to shout out some friends here. And you guys know I've been saying stuff about them a lot recently, and it's because it's had a pretty significant impact in my life, and it continues to. I want to shout out the folks at North Star Grounding. This was John Haggerty he was on, and this guy is freaking awesome. So he's under the age of 30. His brother's under the age of 30, and John ends up leaving his very successful finance career to help out his brother because he has a very rare cancer. So they're making great progress with this. Nothing's perfect. In fact, unfortunately, his brother lost a leg because of this cancer, but they are moving right along and fighting. So what they did now is they created North Star Grounding, which are these grounding products you can plug right in to the outlet, not literally the electrical part, the grounding part of the outlet, and it grounds you while you sleep. This is not theory, by the way. This is something that you can measure. You can see it yourself. And I've said every single time when I used this, the first 2 days into sleeping on it, I had the highest readiness score on my Oura Ring that I had had in almost 2 months beforehand. So I thought that was incredible. And now my wife and I use it every single night, and it helps with like inflammation and pain. I'm not saying it's a miracle cure. You have to do other things in holistic health, believe it or not. But I do think it's very powerful. So I can't shout them out enough, because everything that they sell in that company goes to funding their nonprofit, which allows people who are dealing with cancers to get personalized messages from cancer patients who have healed their cancers holistically, and then we'll speak to that person directly. So if God forbid, had that, someone will actually make a message for me saying, "Hey, Evan, I also had the same cancer. Here's what I did. I know what you're going through." And it's zero cost to the consumer. So get the best sleep of your life and help these guys out. I think it's amazing. You go to northstargrounding.com. That's code HDP15 at checkout. That's all caps HDP15 at checkout. All right, let's get to our topic today. Another cool healing modality. And I said I'm interested in this one in particular because I've done this before. We're going to be talking a lot about cupping. And if you guys have never done this, you look insane afterwards, and it's kind of funny. It's good content if you're trying to do the social media thing. I remember scaring the hell out of my roommate at the time. This was like probably 7 years ago. I did it for the first time, and I just pulled up my shirt. I said, "You see anything on my back?" And he wasn't into the holistic stuff, so he had no idea what was going on. So you can have fun with it too. You can prank your family. And we're going to be talking to Dr. Tom today. He's the best-selling author of The Cupping Book, Unlocking the Secrets of Ancient Healing. Dr. Tom also owns and operates Charm City Integrative Health, a multifaceted clinic, NYT bestseller, and futurist David Howe called The Future of Medicine. His clinic provides a multidimensional approach to reducing inflammation, improving circulation, and regulating the immune system to help people thrive. There's actually a bunch of other cool stuff in this bio. I'll make sure to have that in the show notes and the audio side. I want to get right into the conversation with him. So, Dr. Tom, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I
This is
love
one
your
of the few
background.
live ones. This is all the stuff that I couldn't hang in the office. So this is a little bit less professional. I do have a couple of certifications there that are acupuncture related, but most of it was just for funsies.
I think it's cool. I always never know to go more like blank setup, or do I put the books in, make myself look smart? I got to get some more certifications.
Well, I have a curtain that's going to go up for like the really straight laced shows where they're like, yeah, we don't want to see any of that. So to, mix it up a little bit, but look, I record my own podcast in this little basement dungeon office. And if I'm going to be staring at myself for an hour, I might as well have something to look at.
Absolutely. So, Tom, this is how we always get the show started. No one gets into this space of whatever you want to call it, natural healing, functional
Yeah.
medicine. No one gets into this space by mistake, especially us men. I think we're more adverse to this than most people.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah.
usually it takes a few paradigm shifts or maybe even some health issues to get into this stuff. So how the heck did you get into the space? I'd love to know that first and
Yeah,
foremost.
yeah, the origin story is always fun. I love hearing that about everybody. Yeah, mine it was pretty straightforward. Fortunately, knock on wood, no health concerns here. But I saw some failures in the modern medical system, let's call it that. The first thing, and I had this always tucked away in the back of my head, I was going to be a doctor when I grew up somehow, MD, right? Because that's what you do. You want to help people, you be a doctor. Um, and I blocked this out of my head. My grandfather used to be a pharmacist. And when I was a teenager and I was helping him out in the pharmacy, he was counting out pills. And one day he's counting out the pills and he goes, "Hey, this guy's a day laborer and he doesn't make much money. And he's got to take 3 of these pills a day for the rest of his life." And this is back in like 93, 94. And those pills were $5 a piece then. And it was like, wow, now I have to take $15 of medicine every day, which doesn't sound like much, except you're going to be taking that the rest of your life, and you're clearly on a fixed income. And he looked at me and he said, "There's got to be a better way to do this, and I'm hoping you find it." That and just some failures of like I made an 8 o'clock appointment before work one day to go see a doctor, and I showed up and the waiting area was full, and I said, "I thought I had the first appointment." She goes, "Yeah, you and these 8 other people." And I go, "So it's already an hour and a half after 8. No one's been called back." "Oh yeah, she's in surgery. She doesn't get in until 10." Well, I don't know if I can curse on the live show, but how dare you book appointments before the doctor's even here?
Mhm.
And I stormed out, and all these little things started to mess with me a little bit. Like I wanted to be a doctor, but I couldn't stand these let's say barriers to treatment. And fortunately, I was at a liberal arts college and I took a Chinese philosophy class and we really got into Taoism, right? And this theories about balance. And then sure enough, there was a like an after school club Tai Chi class. And I took that. It was like, wow, these concepts kept coming up and coming up, coming up. I transferred to a new school. And while I was in that school during the junior year intercession over Christmas break, I got a postcard in the mail for an acupuncture open house at a school that was like 10 minutes away from my home. And I went to the open house and I came home with the paperwork. I had it all filled out, and 2 weeks later I was enrolled. And I never looked back. And it's funny to me, and one of the things that I love about East Asian medicine as a whole is the theories that we use there are used in martial arts, and they're used in music, and they're used in poetry and the calligraphy and every aspect of the life. And it's tied so intimately to this natural order of being that like now when I look at stuff, sometimes I'm not sure if I'm looking as a clinician or as just a regular guy on the street, because oh well, no, that theory plays out here too. And it's a beautiful thing to see that manifest throughout your entire life. So it really absorbs you and becomes who you are.
Yeah.
Or I absorb it. I'm not sure which way that goes.
And the origin stories for me, they did. Yes, we have some crazy healing stories on here, and that's
Yeah,
beautiful, and we love to hear them. But I
yeah,
sometimes think these small little things, seemingly small things that happen in life, they're powerful too. I mean, like
yeah,
you said, $15 a day, $450 a month, 30, a little extra, right? If it's
yeah,
31
yeah,
days in the month, fixed income, average social security check. I only know this because someone that works here taught me this is
yeah,
about $3,000 a month. I mean, no, that's a fraction of their life, and they're stuck. And we all know if they stay on one medication long enough, it's only going to be a matter of time before what another one gets added on, right?
yeah,
No, that's
yeah.
pretty big, actually. And I think it's cool that a postcard. You sound like a curious person and someone that's
Mhm.
very intellectually driven. Like, hey, I get this postcard. I'm going to go check this out. And not only was it successful, I mean, it led your career. So, was there? I got to ask because that seems it's not like it's an impulsive decision. I could see how you had this grander vision as a kid, and then these
Yeah.
little things kind of set the path. But while you were going through school, were you ever hesitant that this was the right path for you, or did you just kind of once you got
Well,
into it, knew it was great?
I've been licensed for over 23 years now.
Mhm.
And it was more back then, even I was in Long Island, and that's generally a kind of well a well-educated place, there was still this kind of you do what now or you're studying what now? It wasn't as well known. And even back then, they were saying like 1 in 10 Americans have had acupuncture. Now that number has to be much higher. Um, and certainly back then, when I first started out, I even had doctors telling patients like, "Oh, you might get hepatitis. I don't know if he uses clean needles." And I'm like that. Well, first of all, that is ignorant out of the box. And now, like, I lecture to med students, about acupuncture. So it's done a complete reversal. More and more people are looking for ways, and I think this is every aspect, whether it's diet and exercise, whether it's what they can do at home, or whether it's alternative practices, which let's face it, in a lot of cases aren't the alternative. The Western medicine, the newer stuff is the alternative. We had systems in place that were working when we were, eating right and moving our bodies the right way and getting the right amount of sleep. And, now we have to have doctorates in lifestyle medicine to tell us all of those things like, eat a balanced diet, make sure we're moving our bodies right for our age and our abilities. And yeah, we lost the way somewhere. And for me, East Asian medicine is this living, breathing thing. So it's like, yes, we do modern stuff. We have modern research. So it's hitting all of those areas, which is, so great. And at the same time, the other part about it I love is the fact that I'll never know it all. Why? A lot of it hasn't been translated. Some of it's been lost to time. More research comes out than I can keep up with. And that's all amazing, right? It keeps you interested. It keeps you living it. It keeps you moving through it. And that's where I find the fun and the joy of all this.
I think if time permits, I'll come back to the
Yeah,
whole
sure.
philosophies there. And acupuncture, in and of itself, is interesting to me. But
Yeah.
let's go into the cupping thing because, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
how we titled it. And so, I would love to know. I always try to go into these podcasts with a healthy level of ignorance, because then I think I ask the
Yeah,
questions that
yeah,
the
yeah.
audience would ask. And cupping's perfect. I went one time to my acupuncturist who
Yeah,
offered this
yeah.
to me 7 years ago. Never did much more research outside of it. So, one, just to start off, I'd love to know, is there's got to be a correlation here between my acupuncturist offering this and you being an
Yeah.
acupuncturist who offers this. So where does cupping actually come?
Yeah. So this is funny. Cupping is not Chinese in origin.
Okay.
And I hope the Chinese don't get upset. I got some street cred and I don't want to lose that. But with that, the earliest text we have is probably the Ebers Papyrus, which is from Egypt in 1515 BC. Now, we're not even sure that wasn't the origins, right? We did things before we wrote them down generally as a species. We know that Persian doctors were using it around that time. We knew the Greeks were using it around that time. And we knew that even though the Silk Trade Route didn't come around or was formally called that before, it had existed for a long time prior to that. So this knowledge, we're not exactly sure where it came from, but this idea that if I create a vacuum and put some kind of a cup or a jar onto the body, I increase circulation was well documented before we even had a formalized system of acupuncture. Now, what had happened and how it got associated with acupuncture, because massage therapists do it, physical therapists do it, grandmas at home do it all the time, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But in about 300 AD, a Chinese physician said, "Look, I know you guys, as writing to other physicians, I know you guys kind of look down on this as like folk medicine, but it has some real clinical value. We should be using it." So in about 300 to 350 AD is when Chinese physicians really picked it up and started including it in their practice, which is why it's part and parcel of a modality that most acupuncturists do.
All right, let's go then to what was it used for originally? Because
Yeah.
even if I mean, I totally believe in this, but
Yeah.
obviously there's a time where people are using it. We don't have the peer-reviewed system of research,
Studies. Yeah. Yeah.
obviously, and I'm sure now there are some things backing
There
it.
absolutely are. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to talk about what was it used for, or used as a treatment for originally, and then what do we know it can actually do now?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great point, Evan. And this is one thing I'll say before we kind of get into that
Sure.
is like, when we look at traditional therapies, yes, there wasn't this double-blind placebo-controlled studies, but there were tons of individual case studies over large periods of time that showed yes, this works. So what people were doing and what people were using this for, the same things we're using it for today. Number one, musculoskeletal pain, right? Yeah, we know if we increase circulation through tissue, we tend to soften that tissue up, right? Blood flow thing, marinating a steak, if you will. Uh, you know, but we also were using it for respiratory disorders, which, modern research is a little light on in that area because most people are using it for musculoskeletal issues. But this idea that we can increase circulation up to 6 inches into the body. So when we're talking about respiratory disorders, yeah, even a side profile, I'm a pretty big dude. 6 inches is definitely going to hit into my lungs.
Mhm.
So increasing circulation to that very vascular tissue can help bring white blood cells to that area, help break up mucus, and really help fight infection. So those were the two main things. We also see a lot of use with digestive disorders, specifically diarrhea, constipation. Uh, Results are going to vary depending on whether or not that is autoimmune in origin, but it is something we can play with by actually cupping right on the abdomen. It's done less frequently because it feels weird for a lot of people to have their abdomen touched. But even the low back in that area where the intestines would lie, on the posterior side of you can cup. Yeah, and that was these were long-standing traditional practices. And I mentioned that, this was kind of folk medicine and it was done in households. Even Godfather Part 2, if you go back and watch that movie, you'll see a scene where Nona is treating the infant Fredo on the kitchen table, and she puts a cup right on his
Huh.
sternum. Because he was sickly as a child, right? They always painted him as the weak one, right? He's always kind of little wiry, little wormy in the movie, but that was that was in the 70s, right? So this has been a tradition that's been practiced in America, especially by immigrants and immigrants from every country,
Mhm.
which is kind of beautiful too. And then modern research, we talk about those double-blind, placebo-controlled studies. Kind of hard to do with cupping because you're going to know whether or not something is stuck to you, right? And the practitioner is probably going to know whether or not they're doing it.
Fair.
But these large meta-analysis studies, these systematic reviews, I should say, rather, we've had about three since 2016 that are very definitive that this does help with neck and shoulder and low back pain. And some of the other applications, like we mentioned before, we need some more research, but there's some promise there as well.
Okay, cool. And by the way, we got 22 of you live, it looks like. So if you have any questions, we're talking all about cupping. Dr. Tom is also a licensed acupuncturist. So if you have any questions about that, I'd love to prioritize them. Maybe 10 minutes from now, I'd be happy to throw in your guys' questions. So with that said, it's good to know. I appreciate anyone that comes in grounded in the science because I'm all for the anecdotes too.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I've ran a light therapy studio for a while. There are
We
people
do
that
red
come
light at
in
our office. Yeah.
people that come in for everything that you can imagine, as you
Yeah.
probably know all too well then. And I tell them, listen, this is great for pain. This is really great for skin health. If you're telling me you're going to come in for this weird fringe condition, that's awesome if it's helping you. And I'm
Yeah.
so happy if that's the case. I can't back that up at all. So I'm not going to advertise that it could do that because that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think all good science probably starts with these anecdotes to some degree, right? I mean, how do you
Well, yeah,
form?
I mean, how do you get a hypothesis without
Exactly.
going like, "Hey, that's kind of weird,"
Yeah.
or even if we know the physiology, right, and we don't know what's going to happen. Well, if we know how the body works, how do we stimulate it in a certain way to play up that,
Mhm.
right? And that can be with a drug, that can be with a mechanical intervention, that can be with a therapeutic device, right? So this is how we play and we learn, right? And it's amazing that you mentioned light therapy because that's something that when I opened this office, we included because to me it sounds a lot like acupuncture, right?
Mhm.
We're creating cellular energy, we're increasing circulation, we're reducing inflammation, and all of that are these principles that happen with cupping, massage, red light, cryotherapy. And there's lots of different ways to stimulate the body, but there's only so many physiological responses we can have. And
Yeah.
that's where we get that unique ability to say, well, this one's better for you, and this one might be better for somebody else. And I like being able to do that. And we're really living in an era now where we can do the research pretty quick, but
Mhm.
we also have the ability to look at everything with a more scientific lens. You know,
I appreciate your perspective on that because I don't like either far camp with this because there's some people that are like, oh, all the science is bought. We can't listen to any of that. I'm like, yeah, that has happened. That's proven, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not. It's not all of it. That's crazy. And then there's the other side, and I don't want to stereotype, but I find this happens a lot in like kind of the traditional fitness space. It's like
Uh-huh.
if it's not peer reviewed and everything little bells and whistles, then we just completely dismiss it. I'm like, well, I don't know that I would agree with that either. Like there's many things that have benefited my life that I couldn't prove to you with literature.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's worked for me, and I know it's more than just a placebo. So I
Yeah, yeah.
think you want a healthy balance. Um, if I can, so with cupping, then, like if I think about acupuncture, knowing what I know now after all
Yeah.
these years, I think about that even if I'm not in pain or feeling bad,
Yeah.
I do think that is something that should be used somewhat regularly.
Yeah.
My one acupuncture said it. He said it in such a cool way. He's almost like you should think about it in this seasonal shift because I live in a place where there's 4 seasons. He's like, if nothing else, come get like a tune-up,
Yeah.
every quarter. Like I like that. So with cupping, is this something that you would only recommend for someone treating specific things, or should people use it proactively?
Yeah, I think proactive is where we should invest the majority of our time, so we don't have to be defensive. We don't have to go, "Oh my god, this got so advanced," or "We didn't listen to those little taps on the shoulder when things started going wrong."
Mhm.
So cupping is one of these things that can be applied for, just to feel more relaxed, right?
Okay.
Regulation of the autonomic nervous system is so beneficial, and we have so many methods that do that, and cupping is one of them. So it's the weirdest thing when I do it clinically in the office where after a few minutes, somebody comes in, we put the cups on, and I tend to be really, really aggressive in the clinic when I do the cupping. So some people are like, oh, that's a little too strong, and I'll regulate it and adjust that. But I'll come back in and they're snoring.
Hmm.
Yeah, so just that, just to come in, I've got Baltimore and the area of Baltimore I'm in, we've got like a CrossFit box like in every direction. We've got, little boutique gyms, we've got major gyms, and people will come in and you mentioned the weirdness of the marks. That's a calling card for me now. Yeah, yeah, they'll go to the gym after or before, right? They'll come in, they're all, workout sore. We'll do the cupping and they'll go back to the gym and people go like, who did that to you?
Yep.
And it's like it's worked out great for us.
It's awesome.
But within that, yeah, using it prophylactically, using it for tune-ups is a great way to do that. And I have somebody that has a 2-week standing appointment. Why? Because he's on a workout routine and he knows he gets pretty beat up, and that helps him recover.
Sure.
So you can dial this into your lifestyle. And as I keep coming back to, this was originally done in homes, and the point of the book, and I see Anne's comment over here. Yes, it absolutely can be done at home. And that's what the book is all about, right? So traditionally we're using fire and we're using glass cups or ceramic cups. Well, today, and this came largely out of Asia, silicone cups, plastic cups with pumps. We don't even need to have the fire. We don't even need to have the risk of something break. So why not return that back to the households?
Mhm.
Do that before you need to go pay a physician or a practitioner, right? Always do that if you think it's out of your wheelhouse and out of your league, and consult with your primary if you want to try this and are concerned. But yes, it is extremely safe. It's been done in households longer than it was done by practitioners.
Hmm.
So where to get the cups? Oh God, if there's an Asian grocery store near you, you can walk in there and probably find it in the health and wellness section. If
Wow.
you go on eBay, Amazon, yeah, search silicone cups, plastic cup therapy sets, and we're talking relatively cheap. So for me, when we're looking at how, and my mission is to treat as many people as possible, you're supposed to put a number to that, right? Or, help as many people as possible. I can't do that in my clinic by myself. But if I write a book, and yeah, the book costs about 25 bucks, but you have that book and it's written so you can pick it up, read it in a couple of hours, and hopefully you've got enough knowledge to give it a go.
Mhm.
And then you practice and experiment on yourself and your family, and you'll have some tools
Yeah.
for the rest of your life. And those cups, the silicone and plastic ones, last a long time if you take care of them.
Thank you,
So
Ann.
sorry, I kind of
Oh,
dove right into that one when I saw it pop up.
That was a perfectly timely question, right? So just for those on audio, Anne had asked, how have you addressed how to do it out yourself at home? So let's transition then a little bit. I think, again, this kind of worked perfectly into the book itself.
Yeah.
For those like Anne that might have joined a little late, or, they skipped the first part of my podcast, then can you just talk about the book again, to give
Yeah.
us the title again, and then
Yeah.
why was it created? Who could it help?
So yeah, oh wow, those are perfect questions. I wouldn't have marketed it that myself. So it's called the Cupping Book, Unlocking the Secrets of Ancient Healing, right? And the Cupping Book, I wanted to make it the most direct as possible. Like you should know what that is within the first three words of the title. But the idea is to make it a home use, very accessible. I didn't want to write a textbook on this that would appear in graduate level classes. I really wanted people to be able to feel like they owned this. And part of it, when I was talking about the history of cupping, this literally went worldwide thousands and thousands of years ago. There wasn't a culture that it didn't touch. When I was teaching at a college in Manhattan, an acupuncture school, we had a large international population. Every one of those students, when we started talking about cupping, was, oh, grandma used to do this. There's always a variation on a theme from where they came from, how they applied the fire in this case to attach the cups. But it was always the same thing: create the suction and then, watch the treatment happen. And as long as we've had something that has been able to hold fluids or create a vacuum seal, we've been able to do cupping. Um, and it's flourished worldwide. So why not give that back to people? Empower them to have some control over their health. A lot of times we ignore that little sore back or that little ache in the shoulder, and it'll go away, or I'll take an Advil. But if I told you could throw on a couple of cups and within 5 to 10 minutes, you'll know whether or not it's better or whether or not you need to have a bigger intervention. Well, that's going to save you some time and some money having to go like make an appointment or go like, oh, do I need to do this? And empower you to take control of your health.
For myself, it's the only thing that's really like nagging. I do have a scoliosis in my lower
Yeah.
back. I can see it on x-rays, but no matter what I do, I can get it better. I can definitely get it to like a place where it's not like devastating, but it's
Yeah.
always something that kind of lingers with physical activity. And I'm thinking about this. My wife loves anything that's strange or fun or unconventional. And if I
Yeah.
told her, hey, listen, we're going to the Asian grocery store today and we're going to go
Yeah.
buy
Yeah.
some cups, there could be nothing that would delight her more. So thank you for this.
Well, Evan, after we get off the air, shoot me your address and I'll send you a book and
Oh,
some
thank you.
cups that we have at the office. I try to make it fancy. So I got some custom cups with our office logo on them.
Well, that's Tom. I appreciate that very much. The audience can attest to this. Anytime someone's nice enough to do that, I'll always share the experience.
Okay.
Even those North Star grounding folks in the beginning, that's not a paid ad. They literally sent me the sheet. It works. So now they don't. I don't even think they know I'm sharing it.
You know what? Yeah, oddly, you say that my feet are actually on a grounding mat.
Oh,
When
that's
I'm
how you
when I'm
podcast,
s-
man.
when I'm stuck in this office for like 4 hours, I got to make sure that I'm getting some exposure to something natural. Yeah,
We have another question. Oh, I think it's just a comment. Cupping therapy is one of the most powerful tools and modalities that can be used for preventative purposes, as well as addressing any health concerns or injuries, etc. Well, thank you very much. We agree. Definitely Dr.
Yeah,
Todd
yeah.
agrees.
Yeah. And this is so funny when we talk about it being tied to so many different heritages and origins. The Quran talks about it quite a bit. So people that are of Muslim faith, they absolutely love it. We actually have a Muslim practitioner at our office who does hijama, which is cupping, but specifically from that Muslim tradition, and they do it on 3 different holy days every month.
Wow.
So we have people coming in to get that specific procedure done.
This is there's so much, and it makes sense because you guys study this, I guess the same stuff. But this is so similar to my acupuncturist that I know here. He's just such an interesting guy. Like
Yeah.
I feel like you almost can't get into acupuncture without having this mini philosopher in the
Well,
person, and they just
you
love.
gotta look at the world a little
Yes.
differently. I'll say that. Oh, Anne's on the grounding mat too. It appears it's a popular item. But yeah, you have to look at the world a little bit differently. When we look at Western medicine, it's this microscopic view. What's the smallest piece? And we need that. I'm not saying we don't need that. We want to know the smallest piece that's wrong, or where can we find that thing that we need to fix. But we also need to have this giant bird's eye view of it. How does that play with every other aspect?
Mhm.
And when we look at traditional therapies, that's really where they excel, right? How do I look at this whole person in front of me, not just the, hey, it hurts right here, or I notice this little mark, but how does that play together, right? And having both of those views really gives us a super powerful ability to diagnose and differentiate people. And you need both. On my arm, and in, I think, the second or third page in the book, is an Okinawan quote, which, like, if we directly translate it, says half doctor, half shaman. And when we pull it back and we look at it more in an English, how we would say it here, when seeking advice for a problem, seek both that of a shaman and a doctor, right? We want that left and right hemisphere of our brains to really play together and come together to give us the best solution for a problem.
Tom, I want to ask this question not to create ridiculous expectations, but I do think it's
Let's do it.
this is a thank you, because this is always a fun question for me with different healing modalities. I would like to know, with your years of experience with this,
Mhm.
what is like the most dramatic story or result you've seen of someone using cupping for XYZ condition, and it's like, wow, I didn't know it could do this. Again, not because it's necessarily going to happen to everyone, but I think it
Yeah,
does
yeah.
show the power of these things,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'd love to know.
Yeah, so let's keep HIPAA in mind here. So I'll out my co-host on my podcast, The Reverent Health. Matt, it's real funny because he's deep. I mean, like, both of us right now could grab 10 pieces of, like, here's a device. Oh, this you put up your nose for allergies. It's right here, right in front of me. And he's the same way, and that's kind of how we got into the podcast. But he kept going like, oh man, I've been having some pain, and he keeps pointing to his liver area, and I'm like, I don't think it's your liver, man. So I finally got him to come down to the office, and I'm pressing on his back, and I found this one really sore spot, and I put a cup on it, and he goes, "It's gone." I mean, it was almost instantaneous, and it blew his mind because we're so conditioned to go, it hurts right here, so there's where it must be. That, like, this idea, and I mentioned this before, that 5,000-foot view of looking at everything. It just made sense to me that, like, hey, maybe his ribs out, maybe there's some tightness here that's pulling on that, maybe it's just intercostal muscle. I don't have a definitive diagnosis, but I knew when I felt there, like, hey, he's probably going to get some relief, and within seconds.
Nice.
Yeah, so when we nail it, we get it right like that. It looks magical, but really, there's a system and there's a philosophy behind it that's at work. And it comes from observing, thousands of people over the years.
Speaking of the system and how everything's connected, I think I will, because we have about 17 minutes. I'd love to spend some time on the
Sure,
acupuncture
sure,
side,
sure.
because I think it's so cool. Before that, because I'll give you a chance to shout out stuff at the end too. But
Okay.
just for those that were maybe listening primarily for cupping, they'd love to grab the book. Is that Amazon? Where else can it be found?
Amazon, any place that sells digitally, will sell our book. BarnesandNobles.com. If you don't want to support the big guys, go to thecuppingbook.com. I think we have a list of the stores that's available on there. Once again, the URL was there, so you bet I'm going to score thecuppingbook.com. It was so straightforward.
Okay, beautiful. So I know we could probably do multiple podcasts on acupuncture, but if we
Yeah,
can encourage people to do two modalities regularly today, I think that's great. You mentioned, you had the sore spot on the guy's back, and you put the cup on it,
yeah,
almost
yeah.
instant relief. It took me back to when I became completely sold on acupuncture. My
Mhm.
acupuncturist, he did something along the lines of, like, he pressed into my stomach, and he's like, "Does this hurt?" And sure enough, probably 7 out of 10. I was like, "Wow, I'm actually very surprised." And then it was either my big toe or my pinky. Again, for the sake of the story, let's call it the big toe. He flicked in one of the needles. This is my
Uh-huh.
first time there. And he's like, "How about now?" And he's 100% pressing
Yeah, yeah.
harder. And I'm like, Okay. That is, there's no way that was placebo. And instantly I'm shutting up and listening. And I was open minded to begin with. But when he did that, like, bam, check this out. And now your stomach doesn't hurt. I'm like,
Yeah,
what is going on? So,
yeah.
can we talk about the science behind this and
So do
how
you,
it
do you
looks at
want
the
me to tell
body?
you what he did there?
Please.
So there's 1,000 different ways that we do things, and acupuncture's always been a living, breathing thing. So some acupuncturists, I'll say something, other people say, I've never heard of that, or they'll say, oh, I don't do that, I do this. So what it sounds like what he was doing was some abdominal diagnosis where we map out all the channels based on these internal organs.
Mhm.
And it sounds like he was somewhere near a spleen or a stomach meridian point, right? So we call these points alarm points on the abdomen, and they help us diagnose as well as treat. So we press, and we're not looking because you're not coming in to say, oh, it hurts right here. We're looking for a specific. It's normally where muscle groups meet or clefts and bones. That's where these points lie. But we're looking for some kind of response. And then he went to a point at the end of the channel and triggered that to release that area. And this is how we do this feedback loop. We also do it with taking the pulses. We'll put some needles in and see if the pulse changed. Right. So we want this feedback. And it sounds like he's a very seasoned acupuncturist if he's doing that. That's good work.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
My
because
God.
some people put the needles in and they don't check anything. But to be able to get feedback to you, one, it convinces you I know what I'm doing, right? And
Mhm.
that's always important. But two, it allows us to know we're going in the right direction. You had pain, now you don't.
Yeah.
Oh, good. And it can be that quick. And this is where it gets dicey because we know we have more studies than in the Cochrane database than physical therapy and chiropractic put together. And that's not slamming either of those. Most of our studies were done to disprove acupuncture and they
Wow.
couldn't do it. They're like, no, they're actually what's happening is what they say is happening.
Yeah.
Now we use different terms because we were, using a black box model. We didn't have MRIs and blood tests and these kind of things. But when we say, oh, this point stimulates the Wei Qi, how we call defensive energy. Well, now we do studies and go, no, you stimulate that point, and 30 minutes later, the white blood cell count's higher. Oh shit. That's amazing.
Mhm.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know if I could curse or
You're
not.
you're good. You're good. You're good.
Okay. All right, I'll keep it to a minimum. We'll try and keep that as the only one
It's
then.
not common, but it's not off the record. It's
Okay.
not off limits either.
But within it, the idea is to have that backup with all of this stuff. And to me, it's absolutely amazing that whether this is neurological or whether this is the meridian and the chi flow that's fixing, or just blood flow, it's actually happening. And that to me is absolutely amazing when we see that kind of line up because it kind of looks like magic, but it's not. There is a system that was studied for thousands of years and it evolved. We talk about a text called the Yellow Emperor's Internal Classics, right? That is our quote unquote Bible. It's not religious, but within that is the main text that we based all of our modern acupuncture on. Well, probably in the late 80s, early 90s, we found some scrolls in caves. And I'm not going to say the names of the caves because I'll butcher it, and Chinese folks will get very upset with me. But they found these pre-acupuncture texts that talk about the channels. There weren't 12 back then. There was only 9, and there weren't points on there. You had to go and feel around, and you can tell that based on of that and where we were by the time we got to the Yellow Emperor's Internal Classics, that an evolution took place. More data was added to the system by more practitioners recording what they found and what they saw. And that's how we found this system, right? And to be in line with natural order, we have 361 points. They tried to get to 364, 365, depending on whose calendar you're looking at. They have 12 channels, one for each month. Every channel gets 2 hours of the clock where the energy is the highest in. We have 5 seasons in Chinese medicine to correspond with the 5 elements.
Mhm.
But that's when your acupuncturist said these seasonal tune-ups, right? Why? Because the energy is different during those times.
The song.
And and in correspondence to a lot of natural order, okay, we'll assign the organs those time frames. And this is when those are working best. These are the seasons when those are working best. And just like we harvest at the end of the summer. Why? Well, that's just when the crops are done.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's so we try to relate that back to the human body, and it sounds very out there and witchy and whatever you want to call it. But there's a rhythm. We know we have circadian rhythms, and we know we have life cycle rhythms, and Chinese medicine includes that. And I think that's part of the beauty of the system.
Well, Tom, to that point, that's and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but going back to the science, like
Yeah,
hardcore science versus no
yeah.
science group, sometimes it has nothing to do with that, even if people say, because I love this person very close to me in my life,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
it's let's say a family member that when I was starting the light therapy stuff, fully supported me, but like,
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know if I believe in that. And they meant generally. I'm like, well, this
yeah,
isn't an opinion.
yeah,
If you
yeah.
said I don't believe in it for XYZ weird condition, fine. But
Well,
like,
yeah, yeah, it's not Santa Claus.
right, right.
It exists.
So you realize the science sometimes means nothing because you don't read it anyway.
Yeah.
So let's say this because I want to. It seems like you have a bunch of stuff probably lying in here. So if you
Uh-oh.
had to reference, I don't need the exact codes of them. I'm just saying the studies in general.
Yeah.
If you had to give some of the most cool, interesting, or convincing studies for some of the folks listening that shows acupuncture is indeed
Wow.
a very valid modality,
Yeah.
what would be some of those?
Without pulling up an individual study, this goes back to the ooh, 80s, the World Health Organization, right? And people have mixed opinions about the World Health Organization. But it recognized 34 groups of conditions. And it spanned different systems. So we're talking about GI disorders. We're talking about neurological disorders. We're talking about, musculoskeletal disorders. Immune system disorders. These are things that we actually see clinically that you can assign diseases to within that. And that group has been adding, or that should I say, that list of conditions has been gaining steam as we're dialing in more. I mean, one of the biggest things that we saw, and we can talk about COVID, good or bad, there was a big study published. And when we talk about a lot of diseases and disorders, chronic inflammation is part of the issue, right? So we know that I believe they called it the cytokine storm was part of the issue with COVID, right? So many people had these massive inflammatory responses. So it wasn't just respiratory. It wasn't the fact that they weren't getting oxygen around. They also had these massive amounts of inflammatory markers sitting in their system. Uh, so this is recent within the last 4 years. Big studies were published on the ability of acupuncture to break up that cytokine storm, reduce inflammation. And that to me is like one of those underlying things where I know if we reduce inflammation, we're not necessarily curing a disease, but we are definitely helping with the symptoms and allowing the body some space, hopefully, to recover.
I'm sorry to go off the acupuncture thing, but this is a really important question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I feel like you're just someone who loves to help. So, this person just asked for those on audio, any advice for someone who cannot tolerate cupping?
Yeah,
For example, it's way too painful. Would a highly inflammatory state like
yeah.
IBD contribute to someone lacking any tolerance for cupping?
Yeah, so IBD, we were just talking about chronic inflammatory disorders, right? This is an autoimmune issue, and it can be broken up into smaller diseases, Crohn's or irritable bowel syndrome or ulcerative colitis. But while we're talking about this, yeah, absolutely, autoimmune stuff, very sensitive patients. Um, One, if we're talking, and it just so happens I have this little pink cup right here, right? This is a silicone one. And the way this works is if we press this down, if we press it all the way down, we're going to get a stronger suction. But we can press it down a little bit. So we can moderate how strong that cup is going on. So it might take some playing, but I would say one, start really light with the cups, barely on. You know, two, those areas that I list in the book, and if we're talking about IBD, I would start probably low mid back, below the rib cage and above the sacrum, but even start with some light massage, right? Maybe I'll have to write a book on gua sha, which is scraping, because we can moderate that too. We don't have to go hard there, but I'd work on those areas maybe with just hands or a massage roller or something light and work your way up to cupping if it's still too intense, even if you're going very mild with pressure. So, especially if you've had cupping in a clinic, right? They tend to go stronger. One of the reasons you don't see these silicone cups being used in the clinic too much, maybe for facial rejuvenation, they're smaller, but it is because we don't think they're strong enough, right? And I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm a little sadistic when I put the cups on in my clinic. Like I want you to know you're getting it done. But here, it doesn't have to be done as this is not no pain, no gain. I don't want anyone to tough it out.
Mhm.
But start really light with the cups. And if that's even too much, gentle massage to start. Warm up the area. Do that for a while, you
Awesome.
know?
Thanks for the question. Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question.
And I can always tell an experienced podcast person because obviously you're able to roll with my punches here. I'm like, no, back to questions, back to this. So
I
we
uh,
will
I
finish
I
up.
also have ADHD, so
Oh,
this
perfect.
is just a regular day for me.
Like, it's great. I have one more question about acupuncture specifically, then we'll talk
Yeah.
more about where people can find you, and then
Yeah,
we have
sure.
one final thing after that. So, what I wanted to know from you is there are similar to chiropractors,
Yeah.
insurance-based treatments in acupuncture, and then ones that are out of pocket.
Yeah.
So, I think I could probably guess your opinion on it, but I'd love to know the case or the argument for it. I should say, do you recommend people bother with the insurance-only ones, and then what would be the justification for someone to spend possibly $100 to $200 for a 60 to 90-minute treatment for non-insurance covered acupuncture?
So that's a tricky one because like here in Maryland, I'd say about 70% of the people that we have coming into our clinic are using insurance for
Yeah.
acupuncture. Now services like cupping are rarely covered. We use infrared heat and light. Um, and all of that is it's great. We don't get reimbursed for it. We don't charge extra for it either. Some people, it's like you pay for the treatment, you pay for the treatment, and we do what needs to happen during that. Other people are a little bit more a la carte. I would, it's going to be rough, but my statement is going to be like if you trust the practitioner and they're suggesting something that's out of pocket, yeah, have the conversation with them. Why are you suggesting this? How much is it going to cost me? Those are things that we should be doing even with Western doctors, but I find that more often when it's not like the mainstream practice, you go to the hospital, whatever they do to you, most people will just lay there and go, yeah, that's fine.
Yep.
But when we talk about whether or not it's coming out of our pocket or whether it's going to make a real difference in our health, we start, becoming an accountant. So yes, you want
So
to make
true.
sure that you're not going and getting snake oil, but I would like to think that most people in my field are trying to steer you towards better health, not just a better bottom line for themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that being said, I have a lot of patients who maybe they exhaust their acupuncture benefits and they'll come in and pare down what they're getting. Okay, maybe I can't afford the acupuncture, but I'll come get a cupping session. Why? It's shorter, it costs less.
Mhm.
Whatever that is. And most of us really just want to help people. So if you talk to them, if you have a hardship case or you really need the service and the practitioner sees that they'll probably try and give you their best guess or at least try and work with you somehow to try and help you. I mean, that's probably the best thing I can say about that because look, it sucks when somebody calls and we run their insurance and it doesn't cover acupuncture or hey, you got 3 visits a year and you're like, well, this is a modality. This is not a surgery. You're going to need something that's continual.
Mhm.
And you got to try and figure that out for everybody, and it's rough. It's we God, that's a whole nother show on the American medical healthcare system. And I don't want to do that. It's just too depressing. Uh,
All right, so I appreciate that perspective though, because admittedly, I've actually I don't even think they offer. Well, I'm sure they do, but I've never done insurance at
yeah,
my current place, and I know I went to. I shouldn't have equated these. That's why I asked, but when I did insurance for chiropractor, I will
yeah,
say anecdotally, I was less than impressed. But they're like, "Hey, this is all we can do for this,"
yeah.
and so I've always paid out of pocket for that. So that's good to know, though.
It's a weird place because some people will say, "Hey, I'm bound by what the insurance does," and then other people will be like, "Look, I'm not getting paid for this, but we do it because it's important to you getting better."
That's good that
Like
it's
a
still
little
helpful. Is
bonus.
my point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So do what you. All right. Awesome. Awesome. So, all right. Final question then, at least before the signature question of the show. I'd
okay,
love to know. Just shout out where people can find you. Of course, we'll have this in the show notes and stuff, but
okay.
it's cool to hear it verbally. And please shout out the in-person clinic too, because we will have
Yeah,
people that
yeah.
listen for Baltimore.
Okay. All right. So the in-person clinic is Charm City Integrative, TIVE.com. That's where you can find about plenty about me, about the practice, about all the stuff we do. Um, yeah, please check that out, even if you're not local. Thecuppingbook.com is where you can find out about my book. Irreverenthealth.com is my podcast that I do with my buddy Matt that I mentioned earlier. Um, And what I'm trying to do is I think why we both got into podcasting, Evan, is just reach as many people. Like the more conversations they hear people having, the more interaction they have with health.
Mhm.
They take over that ownership, right? It becomes like something they're more inclined to take action on. And I think that's where we get better outcomes for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I actually I end up in Baltimore every now and then, so if
Yeah,
you see
look
me
me up,
randomly
man.
on your schedule, please.
Yeah. Well, even give us a call. Hey, man, he did my podcast, and now I want to check the place out. Yeah, we'll show you around.
Thanks, man. All right, our signature question on the show, and it's so cool to be able to ask an acupuncturist this because, again, I feel like I see so many overlaps between you and my friend Paulo, who does this because you guys
Yeah.
just study so many things and you have very objective perspectives on stuff. So the signature question is this: if Dr. Tom could only do one thing for his health, or you could get all of us to do one thing, let's say for our healths, what is the one thing that you'd get us to start doing or stop doing?
Oh, ooh, oh my God. All right, I'm gonna pick a no money, great for your mental health, all over impact on your entire life. That's completely nothing we spoke about today. Meditation. Number one thing. So I use a Muse headband, which is a fancy electronic device that measures your EKG, or ECG. But it gives you raw data. But it also is like a biofeedback device. It lets you know whether or not you're in a good, calm, meditative state. You do not need it to meditate. But I've been doing it using that for well over 2,000 days in a row. I've been meditating since 1994, not with consistency until I hit that 2,000-day streak, but it has had such a profound impact on how I sleep, my emotional regulation, my ability to handle stress, right? We know these are all things that like mess us up in every area of our life, right? All of us are walking around with our ears next to our shoulders, but when we start to meditate, we create a little bit more space there. We have a little bit more headspace to deal with stressful situations. The greatest thing about that is, I mentioned a fancy headband. Yeah, that's great if you want to get that. Yeah, sit down, close your eyes, take deep breaths. Boom, you're doing meditation. And that will have long-term outcome if you're consistent with it.
100%. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Absolutely love this conversation. I hope people check out your guys' podcast as well. I always say these are like modern day TV shows. You have a favorite TV show, but you don't just watch one. So
Mhm.
please, guys, I always encourage you to go listen to other perspectives as well. So, Tom, thank you so much for being